YouTube. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay. That's the moment of truth. Let's see here.
You've done this plenty of times before.
Yeah, so it should be live. It just takes a few more seconds for YouTube to show. Let's see here. I'm gonna refresh. 1 second. Okay, yeah, we're live. Good. So thank you so much to anyone who's here. I really appreciate you being here. Try to hype this up a little. Today I have a very special guest here, an artist I really admire, Andy Evansen. Is it Evansen or Evansen? Because I heard
it's Evansen, but it's spelled like Evansen, so it's my own fault. All the mispronunciation.
No. So it's Evansen. So an artist I really admire. I've been following your work for a while now, and I learned a lot from you. And just in terms of inspiration and looking at your art, I really enjoy it. And I have to give a bit of a context for the audience and let us know if you can't hear us well or there's any technical issues. When I started doing the research for this interview, it just made me more excited because there are a lot of things I want to ask you, and it also made me admire you a little more just for your communicative skills and the time you give for interviews. I really appreciate you being here. It's my honor.
Thanks. No, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So yeah, my pleasure. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I actually, for the 5 people who don't know you, I just prepared a few paintings that I want to share. So let's see here. Let me know you can see them. It's just gonna block us, but that's fine. And I'm gonna remove that banner that we don't need right now. Here we go. So this, I believe, is a painting you talked about, if I'm not mistaken, the Empty Nest.
Yeah, it was on my blog. Yep.
Yeah. And just a lot of your work I really admire. And I chose these paintings because something about them is not only, I can tell they're they're beautiful looking, but something in the technique is very impressive, very unique, very challenging I think to execute. So we have things like this one where you can feel that snowflakes flying on the glass. That's really something I connect with, and it's rare to see. And I think a lot of your work is, and we'll go back to us a bit, I think a lot of your work is mistakenly, you can think that you simplify a lot, but it's very difficult to get the essence of the scene. And it's tricky, and that's it's a very challenging thing that you do really, really well, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And it's important to, be really familiar with your subject, number one, and to paint something you have an emotional connection to also. I think that question kind of comes up a lot in my workshops with students. How do I choose what to paint? And they're going through photos, and you can tell some of them are places they've never been. They went online and dragged photos down, and that's paint something in your
worst reference possible.
Yeah, I know, right? Overly colorful, overly complicated. No, I keep telling them, paint something in your world, paint something that speaks to you, and it makes that a lot easier.
Yep, that leads people like me to paint a lot of cars, which I think half of my audience isn't really connected to, but I love cars. So I'll paint them all day long. Now, if we're talking about colors, I like to start usually the interviews with, I think, one of the more important questions. That is, Andy, what's your favorite color?
Well, a color that probably the newest color on my palette that I've grown to just love and I no longer can do without is
we have the scoop here.
Lavender.
Lavender,
yeah. It's got a little opacity to it, and I use it in my sky washes to kind of take the edge off of all the blues and stuff. So yeah, it's just a beautiful color, and that little bit of white in it, that milkiness, adds a lot to the washes. So yeah, I've come to rely on lavender quite a bit.
Yeah, it's great for windows too, because they tend to reflect the sky, and so you get this beautiful opaque kind of glass feeling to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So I'm a big fan.
You have a favorite color?
Yeah, I'm all about the blues. I run out of them the fastest. French ultramarine, phthalo blue. I'm really kind of a generic answer to me. But if I'm fully honest, I like the warms. I love the reds and the yellows the most, oranges, everything in that spectrum. That would be my favorite. I guess blue is the most useful, but these are the ones I like the most.
Right. Well, yeah. That's I would agree with that. The blues are the most useful. Whenever I order paint, it's cobalt blue and Payne's gray and cerulean blue. That's the blue I use the most, I think.
My newest is manganese blue hue, and I like that a lot. It has a bit stronger blue. Yeah, it's good for sunnier days, which we have plenty of here. So I need that. So one thing I'm really curious about is I like to get kind of the origin story. Now I have done some research, and I do know that you've been creating from a young age, and you have come from a bit of a, I don't know if artistic family, but people in the family kind of draw. So I'm curious to hear about Andy as a kid. What were you like? What kind of a thing did you create?
Oh, it was all sorts of trouble, man.
Well, that's the scoop again.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. No, I wasn't. I was a good little Catholic boy in a big Catholic family. I had a great childhood. 7 siblings, so there was always somebody, and my mom just obviously stayed home and took care of kids and tried not to go insane. And but we lived kind of out in the country, and I had a neighborhood. It wasn't a big neighborhood, but I swear it was like every other house had a kid that was close in age to either me or one of my siblings. So it was like just running around all the time and there was a farm right across the street from us, so I could go over there and spend a lot of days up in the haymow and playing around on that farm. And we had a woods behind us, so we were out camping. And those days are long gone, I think, when parents are like, yeah, just go ahead and we'll see you at dinner.
Kids were actually allowed to play outside alone.
But we did. We'd disappear in the woods or the fields or something and show up for dinner, and that was it. Yeah. I'm sure my mom was thankful for the peacefulness of the kids somewhere else.
Yeah. And it's funny, when you have 7 kids, maybe it dilutes the worries a bit. Like, okay, there are 7 of them.
Yeah, exactly. You can always blame one of yourself. I didn't do it, Rusty. But
and
no, it was great. And we were always drawing. My dad worked for the area I grew up in was pretty well known for like the paper industry in Wisconsin, a lot of paper companies. Oh. And my dad worked as a computer programmer for Bergstrom Paper Company. So we always had reams of paper to draw on and stuff. And we put it to good use. We were always drawing something, it seems like. What
kind of a thing? Was it like characters or, because a lot of times I used to draw a lot of people and animals.
Yep. I loved comic books. We would collect comic books. So I spent a lot of time and those were tough to draw. I mean, trying to draw a Spider-Man suit accurately was a nightmare. I remember, doing that in Fantastic Four, had that character, the Thing, that was like a rock, big boulder guy, and trying to get all those shapes and stuff. But yeah, I did a lot of those. My brothers and I used to love reading the Hardy Boys when we were kids. And at one point, 2 of my brothers and I took turns. We divvied them up and we drew all the covers of the Hardy Boy books. And at that time there was I don't know how many there are now, but there was 54 or something of them. Wow. And just drew those and put them up on our room. So yeah, a lot of, copying from stuff. I don't think I was that creative to just kind of go out and draw the landscape at that young age, but definitely was honing my drawing skills nonetheless.
Yeah. That's really cool. And did you have any other hobbies aside from that?
Yeah. I loved sports back then, still do. But so once I got old enough, I was in track and football and stuff, and we'd always be, playing some kind of sport like that in the fields around the house and stuff too. I always liked to read. I still read quite a bit, and nice. Movies. I love movies too. I remember vividly when Star Wars came out. I must have been 9 years old or something, and I was just huge. Oh my God, yeah! That just blew my mind. I think I had a paper out when I was a kid, and I think I spent all my money just going to see that thing 10 times in the movie theater. So yeah, I've always had a love affair with movies. I love sitting in a movie theater. That was one thing I really missed during COVID, going out to the theater.
Yeah, we just recently went to see Free Guy. It was really good. Highly recommend. It's nice. Really funny. Yeah, good. It was. Yeah,
I still haven't been back to a theater. We watch it here at home, obviously, and Netflix and stuff, but.
Yeah, it's a different experience. So I think we can jump a bit in time, but before that, just out of curiosity, anyone else from the siblings go on to do something artistic?
No, not really. I've got a brother, my younger brother, Paul, is a stage persona. He does a lot of, he was actually a morning anchor on one of the news stations. And he does a lot of plays and acting and musicals and stuff. So he's involved in the arts that way. My older brother Jerry is really creative with woodworking and stuff, so he's done
Nice.
he's done a lot of that over the years. Some pretty impressive pieces. He did a really cool piece for me. Um, we were in China one time, and I was walking around, and this artist studio had a really cool, like, old carving, and it meant art studio in Chinese, I guess, the symbol and stuff.
Oh,
So
okay,
I took a
okay.
picture of it and I sent it to Jerry, and I'm like, hey, do you think you could make something like that? And he did it
Nice.
so beautifully. Did this
Wow.
little plaque out of a piece of wood and like stained it so it looks a little antique and stuff. So I got that hanging in my
I
studio.
love that. I
Yeah,
love wood carving, stuff like that. Love
yeah,
it.
I didn't get that skill, so.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
fine.
it's arts was always around in the family, and I think it's important. My parents encouraged it, and thankfully. So, but
Yeah.
I realized, at a pretty young age, I'm not qualified to do much else. I, I love to draw. I'm good at it. Why not do something that, I did. I was aware, especially by the time I was like in middle school, that I can draw better than most people.
Mhm.
So I started taking more art classes, and I think that's true with anybody. You're not going to, sign up to do stuff that you're not good at or don't enjoy. So, yeah, and it all worked out. I mean, it's not the most lucrative career in the world going into the arts, but yeah, I
Money's
mean,
not everything, you know.
exactly. You can't put a
Yeah.
price on spending your life doing something you love.
Definitely. And I think it's a very unique gift. And not to say that there's like we're gonna talk maybe about talent versus skill. But it is a unique gift, that attraction to creating. I think a lot of it is just the spark that makes you want to do it, and then you build skills because you enjoy it more than anything, I would say.
Yeah,
I think that's really unique, and more unique than a lot of other professions. I actually really
I agree.
admire that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So if we jump a bit in time, you become a medical illustrator. Did I get
Mm-hmm.
that correct? So
Yep.
I'm actually curious about that. What was the route to becoming one? I know a friend of yours owned a business. I did hear a bit about that, but I'm curious to hear how you kind of got to that place. And we'll get to watercolor. We'll get to the juicy stuff. Everyone wants to probably
Yeah.
get to that. We'll get there. Trust me.
Yeah, it's all interrelated. Trust me.
Of
So
course,
yeah,
it
I
builds it
was.
up.
Yeah, at that time, the University of Minnesota had a commercial illustration program, and I was going through that. That just kind of fit my needs, I think, more than the fine arts program. Kind of regret it now that I didn't spend more time, getting a more well-rounded arts background. Again, I kind of focused because I like to draw and paint a little bit. So we used watercolor and pencil drawings and acrylic and stuff in those classes, and that was just kind of up my alley. And had to get good at doing figurative work, obviously. So
Mhm.
in the earlier college courses, took life drawing and stuff, with models and everything, and then we did a lot more, figurative work in the illustration program too. So I didn't. There are programs. There's a few schools in the U.S. that have medical illustration. You go to get a master's in it. I
Hmm.
never did that, but just got hired out of school that Beck Visual Communications, and brought my portfolio in, and she hired me on as kind of an intern. Learning the ropes. And then I went back to school and took some nursing classes just to get more familiar with anatomy and stuff.
Hmm.
But yeah, worked for her for probably, I don't know, about 5 years or so. I don't know, it's all a blur at this point. But once we started having children, it just worked out better that I stayed home more. And so then I left there and then started doing it freelance. And it took a little while to build up some clients, but luckily around that time was when the internet was exploding too, and all. That's how old I
Yeah.
am. We didn't used to spend all our time on the internet and sending emails, but so you could start reaching out, to a lot more possible clients, through those avenues, which helped a lot too. And then, yeah, it was because I was freelance and working from home in my spare time. Just started watercolor painting because my
Hmm.
medical illustrations became all, digitally created for the most part,
Yeah.
Photoshop and Illustrator.
Yeah, I wanted to say about that we kind of have digital media to thank for you starting watercolor in a
You
way,
do,
because you
in
kind
a
of felt like
roundabout way,
you,
yeah.
yeah, you felt like you lose connection with that real, I would say, physical thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, I did. I missed the brushes and the paper and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, the Photoshop made the medical illustration work infinitely more productive.
Hmm.
You can start, especially with how technical that field is. You can lay instruments on and layers and stuff. And before, I remember when I was working for Joan Beck, we used to have to still do the frisket on the paper and airbrush everything. And if you had a
Yeah. Well,
series of surgical, like a surgical procedure, it was like you had to paint every step of the way almost,
that's
and now in
insane.
Photoshop, it's like you can create the bones underneath, and then on the layer
Yeah.
do the muscles, and the layer and do the skin and the fat, and you can just change the layer and drop it in instruments in and
Hmm.
out. And so, yeah, it made it a lot easier.
And about that, so I do wonder about when you're doing this kind of work, you're basically drawing the invisible in a way.
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
it's things that. So I wonder just a few words about the process. Like, how do you even do you have that anatomical knowledge of all the layers? Do you use kind of references? Are you actually in direct conversation with people who guide you? Kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, I used to have to go to the cadaver labs and stuff and take,
Da
which
Vinci
was,
style.
yeah, exactly. Very interesting, So yeah, I got to go in there and with the engineers and the surgeons and stuff as they were going through, and taking pictures of the whatever I was going to be illustrating the implant, and taking notes, and then they would uh, send me a lot of reference photos too from actual surgeries that they had done and everything, so I could get a feel. But those are, I mean, it was so funny. I get those surgical photos, and I'm just like, I'm even more impressed with what surgeons do now. It's just, I know
Yeah,
why they need illustrations. It's just a mess in there, They're
yeah.
pointing out things, and I'm like, what? Where do you see that? So that's why they need illustrations. It's really clear and definitive, and just kind of showing things um, the idealized way, I guess, of the
Yeah,
anatomy.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's almost like studying from an anatomy study where you see how all the masses work and you can draw it easily because someone else essentially did the work for you and
yeah,
interpreted it. It's much easier
yeah.
than that's why there's this idea of painting from paintings, which I like to an extent of practicing that instead of from a photo or from a real
Mm,
life view. I think there is some merit to thinking how the person created a painting. On the other hand, it's kind of a second-hand impression. So
yeah.
it's fascinating that way.
Yeah, I didn't really do that much when I was learning. I've got a couple of little copies that I did from my Skip Lawrence book. He was just so good at painting those big, simple shapes.
Yeah,
So I practiced
I
that a
love his
little
work.
bit, but I don't think I've, not once in my life. I might be one of the only people who's never done a copy of Joseph Zbukevich or Alvaro Castañeda.
Yeah, yeah,
That
I
puts
get
me
it.
in
You
the
did things
vast
your way.
minority. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But
basically, the world goes a little digital, and you're like, okay, I'm sick of just working in Photoshop. You start to spice it up with watercolors. How do you get started?
so going back to my medical illustration boss,
Yeah.
she signed me up. She saw that Skip Lawrence was going to be teaching a workshop in Minnesota, and she had that book in the studio. We were always talking art, not just medical art. She was interested in
Mm.
all kinds of painting and stuff too. So she had Skip's book, and I went out and bought it. And then she saw he was coming, and she actually paid for me to go to the workshop and learn from him, which was really cool. So that was my
Mhm.
first exposure to a watercolor workshop.
That's cool.
But I was just starting out, and I was lost. It was way above my pay grade at that point. I didn't know what I was doing, and Skip had already kind of started morphing into color theory and abstraction
Yeah,
and stuff. So
he
um,
really changed his phase. No.
yeah, he did. He changed his style quite a bit. So yeah, but luckily, I mean, it opened my eyes to the possibilities of other things you can do with watercolor. You can be loose, and it focused on big shapes. And I always tell my students this. I didn't realize it at the time, but once I started teaching myself and I was going through Skip's book, I'm like, my God, I talk about all the same things that he did, So at some point it sunk into my subconscious, I guess,
Yeah.
the lessons I learned from him, even though I wasn't ready to hear him at that point. But yeah, his book, Painting Light and Shadow in Watercolor, is like the best how-to watercolor book that I found. It's full of great
Yeah.
stuff. So
A
yeah.
student of mine gave me a copy.
Oh, nice.
Lended me a copy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you never gave it back.
Yeah, no. Oh, actually, let me check. No, he got it back. It's not here, unfortunately. I wish I had it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the things you talk about also kind of found their way into the things I teach for sure. You can't stop the influence. One of the things I like a lot is the idea of merging based on values. That's something that I talk about all the time. Like people here probably get bored of it because it's so key. And to me, I
It
like to
is.
focus on values and
Yeah.
the light, of course.
Yep. That's everything. I mean, those little value studies I do, they read so well from a distance. And people, I think all my workshop instructors talked about value studies, and you hear about it all the time, but I don't remember anybody, actually showing us how to do them,
Mm.
or making us do them more than one little one or something.
And one
Um,
step here, one step there, which I love how you do.
yeah, kind of going back and forth
That's
between the
really
value
clever.
study and the color painting. That helps a lot too, because that big middle value shape is that's the elusive one. That's where you're looking at all the stuff out there, and trying to make one shape out of dozens of shapes is really a
Yeah.
lot harder than it looks.
Skip's really a master of it. That's one
Yeah,
of the things. And he's like, I'm gonna create that sense of depth, maybe not even with values, but with temperatures and colors, which I found fascinating. To me, it was
yeah,
a paradigm shift.
exactly. Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
good information. So,
So I'm curious to hear. Did you reach a point where you learned something that was monumental? Maybe it kind of changed your whole approach. Is there a point like that you can point to? Maybe even early
uh,
on, or later?
yeah. Well, I think one of the best things that happened was when I became aware and started following more of the British watercolor artists.
Hmm.
I always point to Trevor Chamberlain as my biggest
He's amazing.
influence. Yeah,
Yeah.
by far. And at that point, I was still, painting from photographs a lot. I'd gone out a little bit, but I hadn't been outside painting that much. And I saw, he was doing these beautiful little 7 by 10 inch on
Hmm.
location watercolors, and I was like, oh, you can work small, outside. At that
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody was telling me to work bigger all the time, work bigger, work bigger. So that helped me a lot too. But just the softness that he gets in his, I think my work took a shift eventually, once I started trying to work on wet paper a little bit more to get some atmosphere and some softness. Up to that point, my work was still really graphic and kind of hard edged, and the colors were
Mhm.
really strong. So
Yeah, my camera died. I'm gonna fix that. Sorry about that.
that's
It's
okay.
weird. That happens. Let me see. One second. And by the way, as we talk, I do see the chat. It's just a bit hard to actually answer,
Oh,
but I will say the book is Light and Shadow by Skip Lawrence. Is that
yep.
correct?
Painting light and shadow
I think Light and
by
Shadow.
Skip
Yeah,
Lawrence.
that's good. Now, how do I get this fixed? That's never happened before, actually. So let me see.
You're gonna lose a face. It
Um,
should have been mine.
no, I disagree. So I have a button, Start Cam. Let's press that and see what happens. And hopefully I'll be back in just a second. So I'll ask you a question in the meantime because the audio does work.
Sure.
When you initially, let's say, went fully professional, was that kind of a leap and something that required courage, or did you kind of ease into it?
I definitely eased into it, which was great, because that was another big benefit of my medical illustration career. Um, I didn't feel a rush to make a living off of selling my watercolors. So I talk a lot about with my students, don't paint stuff because you think it might sell. Paint things that mean something to you. But you know, it was easy for me to say because I wasn't relying on selling paintings to make a living. So I just got to keep getting better slowly, and I think that made a big difference in my approach. I would have felt a lot more pressure to succeed, obviously, if I was jumping right into it, trying to make a living as a watercolor artist. So
Yeah.
yeah, it all worked out, just kind of bouncing back and forth between those two careers. When I had time to watercolor paint, I'd do that, and uh, it just made it a lot more enjoyable, I think, not having to deal with
Mhm.
that, because that is a lot of pressure. It's not
Yeah.
easy to do this. There's a lot of people who can paint. There's limited gallery space, and again, this was before Instagram and everything too. So
Yeah.
it's not like your work, you could just take a picture of it on your phone and throw it out there to the world. You needed to be good enough to actually get into a gallery or get a magazine article or something to let people know who you are.
hmm And I think today, with connecting it to social media a bit, there is this pressure to share, and this understanding that if you're sharing, you're basically giving yourself more chances to be discovered. Do you think there is value in working in private and really kind of closing off that time to work on something that first no one will ever see or not necessarily see, and also you don't feel the pressure to share it at any stage, and
Oh yeah, definitely. That's really important. My friend Joe just did that with a painting. He's been painting a lot and just kind of showing the progress shots of him being out on location. But
yeah.
I was texting him and he's like, "Yeah, I'm in the middle of another big project right now." And he told me a little bit about what it was, but I was like, "I don't remember seeing anything." He's like, "No, I'm not posting it at all until it's done, this time."
That's why it's
So
big.
yeah, no, it kind of builds the anticipation a little bit, and there is a point where you need to not just keep throwing it, and it's I don't know if it's one of those things where it's, absence makes the heart grow fonder or whatever, but when you see the same post, people who post 8 times a day and it comes up in your feed, pretty soon you just start going by. But if you can just kind of hold back once in a while and post once a week something you're proud of or whatever, I think it means a little bit more when people see those paintings. So I don't feel the need to throw everything out there, that's for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, you definitely don't want to become like a slave to the algorithm, and you feel like you have to. And I will say
Right.
another thing. I think even from a more selfless perspective, I think that working in private is the thing that really allows you to then create the works that inspire people. So it's kind of like your obligation as an artist to have that path and have that time for consolidating. That's at least what I feel. And I keep falling off and coming back on. That's just how it is. But then I'll find kind of the focused work in quiet just by myself for a while, and the result does show, and it does potentially inspire more people.
I agree. Yeah, no, that's definitely when you do your own work. You have to be in the zone, do your best work, I should say. When you're
Yeah.
in the zone and not worrying about those kinds of things. And it is unfortunate that, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. The phone is right by you and you're checking it all the time and
Yeah.
seeing what's out there. So it's tough to, like you said, there is that pressure to feel like, God, I haven't been out there in a little bit, and I got to get some more likes.
People are gonna forget who I am.
Yeah, I'm going through withdrawal. I got to get my likes.
Get my
So,
fix.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, that not and that goes just with my students too. I'm telling them, I don't do critiques a lot of my workshop because I don't want to have them to worry about having something that they're proud of. At the end, I want
Yeah.
them to just kind of dive in and do the work without having to worry about putting it up in front of the class and having me, pick it apart and stuff. So
Mhm.
I try and give them the freedom to just try and absorb my lessons without holding this critique at the end of class. I just keep telling them, don't worry about it. You're going to crash and burn. That's the nature of the beast. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, so in a way, the same thing for us when we're painting in the studio. Don't worry if it doesn't turn out, have some fun and experiment a little bit, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, the action matters more for sure than the result, because there's no result in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The act of, if you're gonna hold yourself back and self critique every small thing you do and every little mistake and every shape you kind of got wrong, you'll never be able to not even finish the painting, but actually have it be sustainable and continue practicing. I admire people who run through paper and they produce really terrible, attempts,
Mm-hmm.
because you're learning the intuitive kind of structure of water and paint ratio, all of these, how much pool you talked about, that like the pool of paint just disappears sometimes, you're not used to it, it just
Yeah.
goes, and you have to constantly be aware of all of these things, and without doing, you can't get there.
Yeah, especially with a medium like watercolor, right? Because it's so, uh, you have to be so in the moment that they're just, everything is based on timing.
Yeah.
When you can go into a wash, when you can stay out of it. You're thinking about so many things when you're in the throes of the actual painting process. You can't be worried about technical things like, is this a middle value? Do I have a big enough puddle? What brush should I use for this shape? You need to monkey around and just kind of
Yeah.
do those little exercises so that all that stuff becomes just second nature, kind of muscle memory. And then when you're in the painting, you can think about all the more important things.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There was something that you said that I really, really liked. It was about how half the process is those techniques and things you kind of have to practice and do until they're intuitive. And then the
Hmm.
other half is that part of focus and being fully engaged in the process and fully on it. And I actually wonder, how do you think, and we'll talk about the former, but how do you improve the latter?
Uh, Boy, that's a good question.
Yeah.
It's just having those teaching helped me a lot too, just because I have to go through all those things with my students constantly. So I'm I don't know if I would be doing all those little exercises still if it wasn't for that. But by doing them with
Yeah.
my students I mean, I teach so much. It's like every other week I'm teaching something. So, I'm always working on those basic skills through the course of a workshop. And it's different when you're doing a demonstration for a workshop than when you're painting for yourself. It's a little bit more instructional and broken down. But yeah, then when I get into the studio and I can just kind of focus on what it is I want to paint, I'm not thinking about anything but what's happening on the paper and what's in front of me. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's when the best things happen.
Yeah, and you have talked a bit about music that I know you do listen to music, but not as much podcasts. So just to say, I'm one of the people who listens to podcasts. I have no problems. I'll listen to news, podcasts, whatever
Well,
it is.
while you're painting.
While I'm painting, I don't know how,
Wow.
but somehow I defer the painting. Of course, if there's a painting that I really need to focus, I may just pause everything and be on it. But for most of my works, I actually find that I defer it to a different part of the brain somehow, and it actually produces a different type of work that it's kind of instinctual. And I
Hmm.
guess maybe I'm just the kind of person with that auditory stimulation doesn't really distract from that kind
Wow.
of a thing.
Huh. I mean, I listen to music that I don't listen to classical music where it's just piano or
I
anything. I
love
listen
classical music.
I know, I listen to music
Rock.
with lyrics and everything too. But yeah, it's so I guess there is a little bit of that in the background for me too. But I'm singing along with songs and stuff in my
Yeah.
head while I'm painting. And but yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess I shouldn't say that because I haven't tried it that much. But
Oh, okay.
even like even if the TV's on in the background, I get distracted.
Hmm.
I don't like to have something else taking my focus away from the painting. And it's
Oh.
kind of like when I took Alvaro's workshop ages ago.
Hmm.
I rented some books on tape. I checked them out from the library because I was driving all the way out to Maine. And a couple of times you miss the exit, because you're involved in the book,
Yeah.
and what's
Yeah.
happening there,
Yeah.
not paying attention to what's going on the road in front of you. So yeah, I don't know. I would find myself either missing what they were saying or doing something on my painting I didn't want
Yeah.
to do.
Well, everyone's different. Yeah, I guess whatever works for you is, and some things work better for other people. I'm wondering what's the biggest thing you learned from Alvaro's workshop?
Um, well, I have a painting of his in my living room that I bought one of his demos.
That's one
It was
important thing.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
It was such a good lesson. It was a plein air workshop, so it was the first time I painted outside really. And I was out with him, and
That's huge for
yeah,
starters.
yep, exactly. That was my first big experience painting outside, and just how to filter and a scene and not try and copy it, because that's my biggest downfall. I'm terrible about changing things. I still try and I'm using the colors I see. I'm trying
Oh
to
yeah, yeah.
paint it fairly realistically. I've gotten a lot better at eliminating things or moving small things, but he was out there and we're all following behind him, the Pied Piper, and he's looking for a place to do his demo, and he starts setting up in this little alley. And I'm looking around like, what in the world did he see here to paint? There's nothing here. So, and he just
Yeah.
did this awesome. He looked down at the end of the alley at this house, and he changed the color of it a little bit and added people walking
Of
around and
course.
put in sign, all this stuff out of his head, and made a really cool, energetic painting out of something so nondescript
Mm.
that it just blew me away at that point. So I started to realize, don't be so literal all the time.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
can the best paintings are the one that, it was still that anybody who lived down that alley could recognize it. But find something a little bit more mundane and elevate it by
Yeah.
painting it in a really interesting manner. That's what I think the goal of a painting should be.
Yeah, I think Joseph Zbukvich said once, "Don't try to compete with real life." So if you choose a
Yes.
subject matter that's too, like, snowy mountains, we talked about that a bit, with that rainbow in the background. How do you get that rainbow in the sky? It's a complete nightmare. I mean,
Yeah, no, then
yeah,
it's amazing how often students will do that when I
it's
tell them
just
to
the
bring,
go-to
yeah, so I tell them to
somehow.
bring
Yeah,
reference photos to the workshop, and they bring in these things that are just an absolute nightmare. I call them calendar photos. Those,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the
That
colors
stuff.
are terribly unrealistic and saturated, and the scene is way too complicated and pretty. And I tell them, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, my friend,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
what are the odds that your painting is gonna live up to that? So
Mm.
find something that's a little less beautiful, and then I want people to look at my painting and say, wow, that's better than the scene, not
Yeah,
vice
yeah,
versa.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I wanted to ask, did you ever have like a plateau or a time period where you felt like kind of things are stuck? But for me, for example, I remember I had a lot of these, and the thing that kept getting me back into watercolor was how challenging it was like this thing I have to figure out. I'm experiencing the same thing with anatomy studies now, and drawing, figure drawing, how to simplify the human body. It's something is so elusive about it. It's so challenging at first, that it kept pulling me in. Did you have that kind of an experience, maybe of a plateau, or you felt like you weren't making progress?
Yeah, and I think it was when I started traveling and teaching too much, and finding less and less
Mm,
time for myself. I wasn't painting things that meant much to me, so I've cut way back on the amount of plein air festivals and that kind of thing that I do, because it was just, I felt like it was one of those things I needed to do to keep my name out there, and just keep showing
yeah,
up at all these events and stuff. But I just really wasn't happy. A lot of the places, it goes back to what I was saying before. Some of these places just didn't speak to me, on any kind of a personal level. I mean, they're pretty for a couple days, but I found myself just kind of really struggling to find things to paint, um, and then I'd get back home and didn't have time to paint here because I'm preparing for the next thing coming up.
yeah,
So yeah, that was, I would say that was about 5 or 6 years ago, where I felt like I wasn't progressing at all, in my own work, and I kind of had to do some soul searching and figure out how I was going to do that. So I started focusing more on, I mean, I still travel a lot, but it's mostly for teaching workshops. I don't really go out and try and hop all over the country and paint places that I'm not
yeah,
familiar with or don't speak to me. So, and I think that helped.
yeah, yeah. Definitely, that there has to be a right balance for that. It's very tempting, and also sometimes you have to, you have to make a living, and a big part of that is teaching. It is being out there, and
Yeah.
I think it's important to set our own kind of boundaries in that regard.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, if you can take me to the experience, maybe especially plein air. So when you're outside and you're painting, what's the maybe the thing you're trying to achieve with a painting in general? Because a lot of people have different kind of things to say about that. What's your thing?
Yeah. I'm just trying to get, but number one, I mean, my plein air paintings, maybe 1 in 5, I actually like
Hmm.
well enough to pop into a frame or something. I go
Yeah,
out there and try and really, um, you know, use it more as kind of information gathering. I think first and foremost, because
yeah, hmm,
when I do a plein air painting, I always take a snapshot of the scene I'm going to be painting first, just in case, and it kind of helps me zoom in and can find my composition if I'm kind of using my phone to take a picture of it instead of being overwhelmed by all the information out there. So I have a photograph of the scene, and I'll do the painting. And when I come home, if I want to redo it in the studio, I put my painting next to the photograph, and they're so different. My painting has, the colors are different. I have light and color in my shadow areas, and so it's really important to get out there, plein air painting, and again, just kind of become familiar with your subject and really, see some of those nuanced colors and subtle values and stuff. So that made a big difference in my work too. I think when I started, because I can tell there was a point in my career early on where I was just painting from photos. I pulled those paintings out and it's just so obvious that I didn't know anything about color or, values and stuff. It was all just copying what I saw in that photograph. So yeah, it's more information gathering, like I said, when I get out there and just trying to be in the moment a little bit more, really learn about that subject, instead of it's just too fast when you're taking a photo of something, the 2 seconds to click a shutter.
Yeah.
But if you stand in front of that scene for an hour or two and paint it, you learn so much more about it. And that way, when I come back in the studio, if I am going to repaint it, I'll do it most of the time within the next day or two, after I've been out there. So that memory is still fresh in my mind. And you can make a lot better studio painting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that idea. I love that idea of using it as information collecting, and you can create even faster pieces that are maybe even less detailed of the same scene and get a different thing every time. And I find that together with photo reference, that's actually the best reference for a studio painting. And I believe you said it as well. You have this small piece of memory from that place, and then you can. Usually, I find that I can blow it up bigger too. And I know you don't paint a lot big, and I'm the same way. I paint small mostly. But I find that, I don't know why, even more than a photo, I'm able to add details in from my painting for some reason.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Just because you've learned so much more about it. Like I said, when you're standing there, you're just so much more familiar with the subject. And that was why I started focusing more, especially over this course of the past year, on just painting stuff around me. If you look at my website, all my recent paintings are just farmlands and fields and skies and stuff. But it's, I've been home a lot more, and those are the things I'm most familiar with. So
yeah, I wanted to ask you.
I want to do this part of the country some justice too. I live in the Midwest. I've lived here my whole life, and people are always kind of focused on the West, the grandeur of the Pacific Coast and the big national parks and the mountains and stuff, or the big cities and urban areas on the East Coast and and that kind of landscape. But there's a lot of beauty here in the Midwest too, and just trying to show people that through my work.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I was gonna ask you is what it is about barns and these types of landscapes that attract you to them. But I connect the dots because you talked a lot about being outside when you were young and seeing these views, and I think these leave an imprint in a way, and that's the thing that and the way that, I don't know what you call these structures in the barns, but that they reflect the light. It's so nice when you can catch that glare and get that beautiful. We're getting really nerdy now, very specific, but I love that.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going back to, talking about elevating the ordinary, in your painting. Just if you can get jazzed up about light bouncing off a silo, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, silo. That's the word.
Silo, yeah, grain silo. Yep.
Yeah, and I find that with these types of views, and you probably can relate to that, when you do the first wash, and if you put a lot of emphasis on connecting everything, it looks magical right now. When you have that, that slight mid value and the paper white, it already looks like something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes I want to leave it that way. I'm like, no, I want to keep it like that. That's the painting.
I do too. I know that wash is so beautiful, and you get all those lost edges in there and stuff, and then you go in and cover up half of it with darks and details. It's a shame that you got to cover some of that stuff up, but
those edges right. Oh.
Yep, those big descriptive shapes. It's amazing how much information we gather from a silhouette. It's not all the windows and stuff that makes the building. It's the contour. It's that big descriptive shape.
For sure. Do you like to paint cityscapes, like in it, like something like an Alvaro or Joseph's book, which would do an actual? Because I looked at your work, I have seen, of course, some maybe cities, maybe towns, which I really like. Do you have that kind of a thing too?
Yeah, but I don't spend a lot of time in the cities. So when I'm there, I do. I'm much more of a small town guy, I guess. Minneapolis and St. Paul here are both beautiful cities. I should probably spend more time up in St. Paul for sure. But even then, I find myself kind of gravitating towards the parks or the fringes, the outskirts of town, instead of being right in the hustle and bustle of things. I'm a little bit more of a loner, I think, than I'm not a big crowds guy. So I like, especially if I'm painting, I like a little bit more peace and quiet. So yeah, I don't spend a whole lot of time in the city.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
I actually
kind of a personality thing. Whereas
of
Alvaro,
course.
my God, he's just in his element,
Yeah,
being
yeah.
around everybody, and so yeah.
Yeah, I'm like that. I don't care, and I hear people all the time. We have a couple of Facebook groups, local groups here, and people do tend to complain that people come and bug them and ask questions. And Joseph Zbukvich is a big proponent of
Oh,
leave me alone, find something behind me
I
people
know.
cannot see. And I'm
Yeah.
the opposite. I don't care. It never. Maybe it happened once that I in the most crucial moment. Someone was like, "Hey," and I was like, "Whoa, okay,"
Oh,
and they ruined a very important detail.
oh
But you know,
no.
you can always fix it. But usually I don't care. I'm very flattered by it, and it doesn't take me out of focus sometimes.
No, I don't care either. And I think maybe a lot of that is from the amount that I teach. I'm used to people watching me paint and asking
Yeah,
me questions, and that doesn't really bother me that much either. Especially, I mean, hopefully most people just kind of come by and watch a little bit and, say, I don't want to interrupt, but I just, what are you doing or something. But it's the people who just, maybe they just need somebody to talk to or something, but you're a stationary target, and they
yeah.
stand there and they start telling you their life
He can't
story while
escape.
you're trying to paint. And I'm just like, oh, please, man, no, that's too much.
Yeah, that's a little too much.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first maybe workshop or even just a lesson you gave?
That I taught?
Yep.
Oh, I think when I first started teaching, it was for a little community college here in town. I got asked to do like a night watercolor class for adults or something, and I can't even imagine how bad that must have been. Because I
Yeah.
wasn't even that great a painter back then, and you're trying to impart knowledge on poor souls. But I just remember being super nervous. I'm the
Yeah.
opposite of my brother who loves to be on stage. I hate being on stage. So I just remember being so nervous to be up there and trying to, tell these people what to do and give them some pointers. But you get better at doing that, the more you do it. It's just now I think you're more comfortable with that kind of thing when you have more knowledge,
Mm.
because you know what you're talking about. So it's a little bit easier. And like I said, back then I think my friend Joe and I talk about this sometimes. It's amazing how fast everybody wants to teach. And like I said, I was guilty of it too. They asked me to, so I did. But looking
Yeah.
back, I'm like, I should have
Hmm.
declined that. I shouldn't have been teaching people at that point in my career. You gotta, wait a little bit and make sure you have something to share with people before you jump into that teaching train, I guess.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point because I do agree to a degree, but I think that there a lot of people can learn from someone who's more advanced. So now you get into the question, of course, of could they have received a better value if they would go with
Mm-hmm.
someone else's lesson. But to me, I'm fine with that. I think as long as you're honest with your skills and you're not trying to bluff it, then I'm okay with anyone pretty much teaching. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in your case, it's more listening to the market because people ask. You feel like that?
Uh, yeah, I guess so. I get your point. And I suppose at that time in my painting career, I was more focused on basic kind of skills too, which um, that was their level also. So I wasn't trying to teach them more advanced concepts or anything because I wasn't at that
Mm,
point in my career anyway. So,
yeah.
so yeah, I guess you have a valid point there. But I know for a fact there were questions that came up in my early workshops that I wasn't qualified to answer. I didn't know at that point. So hopefully I wasn't. If I look back, hopefully I didn't try and fake it, and I was honest enough with them to say I don't know instead of giving them wrong information. But
Yeah.
you do have that pressure that if you're up there teaching, you gotta be the know-it-all, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's funny, that pressure. I was wondering if you were nervous when you gave that first lesson or whatever. I
Oh yeah.
think that yeah, I think that nervousness, it never really goes away. I get really nervous being on stage, but I was nervous before this interview. But it's a bit different, of course, when it's more direct in front of people. But I think that it never really fully goes away. But there is an element to competence that once you know what you're talking about, there is this maybe more quiet confidence that I think surpasses or is more important even than that showiness in a way.
Hmm. Yeah, I try not. I mean, I'm not a part of being an art teacher is you do have to be a little bit entertaining sometimes too.
Yeah.
But I try not to be, too much of a showboat. It's more about just kind of passing along the information that I have. So at this point, I mean, it's tough because I have a lot of repeat students because I try and cram in as much as possible in 3 days. I know by the end of 3 days, the students' brains are probably just, I can't take any
They
more.
melt.
That's enough, and they can go. So that I'm sure that is a result of, I've been painting for 30 years now and learned a lot of things. So I try and give them as much useful information as I can up there. But it's a lot of work. I know my students like I said, they're usually pretty fried by the end of things, I think.
Let's do a quick question from the chat. I see Marina Borrells asks, "What is your favorite paper?"
Um, when I took Joseph Zabukovich's workshop, I was still just kind of using arches all the time, and he gave me a piece of his Saunders to use, and he's like, "I think
Mind
you're gonna like
blowing.
this a lot better." Yeah, Saunders
Yeah.
and I didn't like it at all because it was different from what I was used to. It was very soft. It didn't have much texture. I'm like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to get used to this paper at all. But then arches kind of started to go downhill a little bit. I was starting to have some
I
issues
heard.
with their
Yeah.
sizing and things. So when I was looking for other options, I started using Saunders more, and now I just love it. It's such a beautiful paper. So I hope they don't fall into the same things that happen to Arch's paper eventually. Hope they maintain their quality because there's not many out there that I really like that are suitable for how I want to work. I'm sure there are a lot of good papers out there, but for my style and what I want to achieve in my washes and stuff, that's the best one for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I discovered Saunders Waterford locally. We had it in an art store, a big one here in Tel Aviv. And I started using it and I fell in love with it immediately. And then they stopped bringing it. So that was like,
Hmm.
okay, back to Arch. Now I think the batches I got are old of Arch because it's still decent. Like I just got a 10-yard roll.
Oh man,
Uh,
hold
so I'm
on to
screwed
that.
if it's bad.
Hold on to that
Yeah.
with your dear life.
Yeah. That will last me a year and a
Oh,
half
nice,
easy because I paint
nice.
small. Like you said, I believe that you cut them to small pieces, of course.
Yep.
I'm like that.
Yeah. No, that's no. I started doing more half sheet paintings recently. I used to just every sheet I would just cut into quarter sheets. That was
Yeah.
all I ever did. But now a lot more of my painting. So now maybe every other sheet that I cut up, I leave one side as a half sheet and the other two as quarter sheet, and I try and getting a few more larger pieces in. But even a half sheet, it's amazing how much more difficult it becomes to simplify when you have that much more real estate. I can't.
Yeah.
I've done maybe 10 full sheet watercolors in my life. I'm still not very comfortable trying to cover that much paper quickly, and especially like I said with what I'm trying to achieve with all those lost edges and connected shapes.
Yeah.
It's infinitely more difficult when you have that much more territory to cover. So.
Yeah, and you need to have a big brush, and you have mix in advance so much. I saw an artist, I forgot their name, but I actually talked about them on the channel. That they actually just put the paint fresh out from the tube into a small bottle of water, mix it with water, and then you mix a huge
Wow.
quantity. It's logistics. It's actually
Yeah.
something. It's a part of the process. You actually have to take your time, 10 minutes before that, mix everything you need, and only then
Wow.
you can start painting,
Wow.
which is, yeah, it's not my cup of tea too. I like
No.
small pieces, and small pieces you can still cram in as much detail as you want. I think the only issue is when the paper's texture gets in the way if it's too small.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because what texture is there takes on that much more importance, obviously. So I don't. I
Unless you
mean,
use hot press,
yeah,
but I
I
don't
don't
like
go. Yeah, I don't. I can't get used to hot press paper either.
yeah.
So I don't go much more than an eighth of a sheet. I don't. I won't go really much
Yeah.
smaller than that ever. That's plenty small. But yeah, again, that goes back to why I love Trevor Chamberlain's work so much because he's not worried about painting a poster. He's worried about getting that mood right, getting those edges right, and then I think that's a lot more important. So
Yeah.
Hopefully one day my skill level will be enough so I can capture that and maintain that kind of freshness in a big full sheet painting. But right now it's just out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, and I know two other artists you mentioned, maybe kind of as inspiration. I know Charles Reed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Um, I,
genius.
yeah, he is too. His books, his old books, I love. I love all the pencil work that he leaves visible in his
Yeah, it's so
watercolors.
good.
That's so great.
Yeah.
I always tell my students that too. They're worried about how dark their pencil marks are when the painting's done. They're worried about being able to erase them. I'm like, it's part of the
Yeah.
painting, you know. And I always say, go look at Charles Reed's work, you know, and the drips and the splatters and the pencils that are still there. You know, I just such a great unique style, you know, that he was able to develop. There was just nobody like him
Yeah,
at that time. And
that
again, now that
combination of
goes,
colorfulness,
yeah,
accuracy, all
yeah,
together.
exactly. Yeah, his figures were you know, so often kind of elongated or exaggerated and
Yeah,
stuff, but they were just so cool. I loved his figure watercolors. You know, there was more like what you would do in a life drawing class where you're just trying to
hmm
capture those gesture drawings and stuff. You know, he wasn't painting
yeah,
portraits, he was doing paintings. You know, I love that.
yeah, yeah. I love that too. So let's take another one from the chat. Okay, we have LA for Dreams asks, and it will connect to something we talked about earlier. I live in an urban area. How do you choose what to paint in a scene? I choose whatever moves me. I think in terms of maybe you're looking at a huge scene, and people always experience this. Like, how do I know what to focus on? How do I know what to leave in, what to leave out? If you can give maybe a quick advice on that.
Yeah, well, one of the big things I always tell my students is paint what you see when you squint. So it's especially in an urban scene, your attention is jumping from here to here to here to here. There's, you know, stuff happening in front of you constantly. It's hard to focus and simplify. So you just kind of have to step back. And you can put a lot of that stuff in at the end of the painting too, for the details. But initially, kind of take a deep breath, half close your eyes, look at that scene, see the big important shapes that say cityscape, you know. And then you can come in towards the end and put on taillights and cars and, you know,
Yeah,
tables and awnings and figures flitting about and stuff. But you've got to make sure you're getting that big descriptive shape and energy first.
yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense.
That definitely makes sense to me. I found a really fun trick. So when I'm especially plein air, I find that it's a little harder to notice the shapes and the nuances because when you look at a photo, you can really take a few steps back. It's small, and you see, okay, the trees and everything up top is darker, and then the floor is a little lighter with some elements on it. But when you're outside, to me, it's a bit harder to kind of narrow down the values
Oh, it is.
perceptually. Yeah. So
Plein
what
air,
I do,
plein air
I'll
painting
take a
is hard.
picture. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Plein air is really tough.
Yeah.
Really tough.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no,
You
it's
said
cool.
you're gonna take a picture.
I'm taking a picture with my phone and already just looking at it on a screen, kind of using it as, again, kind of information collection. I'm not going to use it as a reference, actually. But I
Right.
look at it and then I try and bring that pattern from the photo onto real life.
Yep.
And
That's
I think
exactly what I do.
one of the hardest things is that you don't have a frame, because
Right.
that's the tricky part. You
Yep.
know,
Yeah.
you're
Before, and
probably
again, when I first started, it was the days before cell phones. I didn't have that tool in my pocket all the time,
yeah,
so that made it even harder too when I was first starting out because you do tend to, I think, without doing that, you tend to tackle too much because you're surrounded by 180 degrees and you're painting what's in front of you. And before you know it, you know, one of the hardest things to do is deciding what to leave out of your painting. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
so you're trying to capture everything that's in front of you, and it's so important to zoom in and simplify your shapes and stuff. So yeah, once we started carrying cell phones in our pockets around all the time, it was nice to, like you said, just kind of frame it,
yeah,
zoom in and out, get that composition, take a few snapshots to kind of, you know, just so that in the back of your mind, it's like, okay, that's a good big shape, descriptive shape there. I should tackle
mm,
that.
yeah. Maybe the only alternative back then was like an instant camera. Maybe you could
Yeah,
snap a picture,
Polaroid.
wave it a bit. Polaroid, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That thing, I love it. To this day, it's that
I
it's
know.
very
I
hip
had one.
one.
Still have one somewhere downstairs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask a selfish question. If we
Okay.
go back to this kind of a scene, um, So do you have any advice for night scenes? Because night scenes, with watercolor going usually light to dark, there is something a little, I think, elusive in them. First off, even if you paint small, you have a large area that's dark. And
Hmm.
I find personally for me, and that's something I had to practice specifically, I find that it's really hard to control the accuracy of value in the darker range. When it's the lighter range, it's easy. I know there's wide, there's kind of a very T light kind of a thing, then there's the mid value,
Hmm.
then it's a bit easier for me to perceive the lighter side of the spectrum than the darker of the
Definitely.
value scale. So what kind of advice would you give for that? Um,
Well, you're the hardest part about a nocturne is you're right. You've got such a
Nocturne.
big,
You have a
you've got a
professional term for it. That's good.
yeah, nocturne. Yeah, you've got this a big dark area that you've got to cover. You can't do it. I mean, normally the darks on a landscape you can use almost just pure paint. You're going in with a little brush and you're popping on
Hmm.
car tires and figures' legs and windows and stuff like that. But in a nocturne, you've got to have a big brush and you're washing it, so you need to add water, obviously, to be able to do that. Um,
Flow versus value
yeah,
balance.
so it's so tough. Almost all of my nocturnes, I think the sky was probably done in a minimum of 2 passes. I think I'm dark
Mm.
enough the first time around, and just because of the fact that I had to have water in my puddle to cover all that territory. Here comes a cat. It dried. I knew she'd be here
Incoming.
sooner or later. Yeah. So it dries just a little bit too light, and you got to make sure those lights really pop. You need that contrast, right, to make the
Mhm.
train lights, coming into the station there look
Yeah.
really bright. So yeah, and then you got to go over it again, and that's tricky because you got to wait long enough so you're not disturbing the underlying wash to make mud. So if you're going to go over it, especially with those darker colors, it's important to wait until it's um, almost completely dry, your first
Mhm.
wash, before you go over it again with another dark wash, because that's the quickest way to get mud is, mixing one dark color into another dark color. And you want to make sure your darks still have some, either look a little cool or a little warm so you can see
Mm.
that burnt sienna or the blue color that you're using to mix it. So yeah, you got to wait till it's all dry to go over it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge challenge. The funny thing is, the first night scene I attempted, I think maybe the first or the second, the first serious one actually turned out perfect somehow. I don't know
You
why.
jerk.
Sorry, but the technique itself is incredibly terrible. It's super patchy. But then again, I'm big on, like, if you get the right value. I kind of like Stan Miller. Maybe
Yeah.
you're probably
Yeah.
familiar
Oh
with
yeah.
him. If you get
Yep.
the value right and you get the drawing accurate, then it falls into place. And when you take a few steps back, no one really cares if the wash is kind of patchy. You don't really
No.
see it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful hard not to get some of that going on in the nocturnes especially. But yeah,
Mm.
it's all goes back to getting the impression right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Get
if
it
you
on
step
paper.
back, yeah, if you step back and you got the feeling of that
Yeah.
mood or that scene, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll take two questions from the chat real quick, and then I
Okay.
have a question. Maybe it's a little more of a heavier discussion. It's interesting, but it's, and then we'll see how it goes from there.
All
I want to
right.
make sure we're energetic.
Transparent.
So John asks, what brand is the lavender that Andy
Oh,
wants to
Holbein.
use? Holbein.
Holbein.
Good. That's a quick one, easy. And then we have Tom Dancer asking, depending who you talk to, there are more or few rules to watercolor, granulating pigments, only pure transparent, no opaque, etc., etc. Does Andy have any rules or whatever gets results? Well, I know the answer
No.
probably.
Yeah. No. As I'm
We kind of
shaking my head.
discussed it now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I hate those self-imposed rules that people feel like you have to follow with watercolor. Painting's painting. Do what you need to do to get the results. If you need to use some gouache, use gouache. If you need to scrub down an area to get rid of it and repaint it again,
Yeah.
do that. I don't have rules that I know I hate that word, but unfortunately that's become associated with watercolor because it's a very technique driven medium, unfortunately. So people think you can only use transparent watercolor or, God forbid, gouaches. No.
I
So,
do
but I
that all
always
the
say,
time.
go back
Yeah.
and look at Sargent's watercolors. Go look at Turner's watercolors. Go look at, Winslow Homer's watercolors. I mean, all these famous watercolors in history. They all used gouache, in their work.
Mm.
So yeah, the one thing I would say, and it's not a rule, but one thing I strongly prefer not to do is to use masking fluid.
Same here.
Yeah,
It's
I
crazy.
don't like that stuff.
Same.
But it goes back to how you want to paint. So the way I paint, I'm trying to uh, get the painting to look a little bit more energetic and loose, I guess. And using masking fluid from the start just lends a stiffness, I think, to the
Mm.
painting. It's a little bit more contrived. But so if you're painting, obviously, if you're going to be a still life painter or things like that where you're worried about detail, yeah, masking
Yeah.
fluid is invaluable. But if you're trying to get a little bit more of a loose style
Mhm.
of a landscape, I would avoid masking fluid at all costs. Those little negative shapes that you when you paint around a shape versus painting the positive shape with masking
Yeah.
fluid,
Yeah.
those negative shapes are a little bit incorrect, but they're more energetic and
Yeah.
lively, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny. I never heard anyone say it before I made the decision to not use masking fluid. I just always felt that way because I want, and even from utilitarian angle, I really like to have the ability to paint what needs to be painted and skip what needs to be skipped without any external kind of help.
Yeah.
And again, I'll defer to, again, if something works for your process and you enjoy it better and it gets you the result you want, that's perfect. For me, the result I want is of the process itself also being just me adding and adding and adding and thinking about those negative spaces, which are huge for composition and for
Yeah.
design, which is something that comes later. I'm just starting to scratch the surface of design and clever shape design and how everything works together in the scene, kind of the gesture of the whole landscape, if you will. Um, so
That's a
that's
bit
what I
that's
think about that.
Yeah, that's one of the best it's one of the biggest challenges about watercolor, but I think it's one of its charms, I think, are
It's
those having
fun.
to think about. Yeah, it's very fun, that challenge of those negative shapes and painting around them. And that goes back to the importance of the value studies, having that
Mhm.
plan of where you're going to be leaving your light shapes ahead of time instead of trying to come in and put them on opaquely with gouache
Mhm.
or having to mask them out ahead of time. So
Yeah.
yeah, but by painting those shapes once with a value study, and that's why I like to paint my value studies too, by the way, instead of using marker or something,
Mhm.
because I've already practiced, negatively
Yeah.
creating some of those shapes,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
translates to the color painting.
It's crazy how just painting something makes you more familiar with it. I just
Yeah.
put that comment on because John asked a question that's relevant. Is value study something that you always did, or did it come later? If I'm not mistaken, you didn't start with it, right? It's something
No,
that
I
you
did
developed.
not. I think it was kind of born out of when I was started teaching more. I talked about values, but again,
Yeah.
nobody really showed me the value studies that much when I was learning. And so I would talk about the importance of values and joining shapes together and stuff in my earlier workshops, but there was the students just weren't getting it. So I decided I'd better, find a way to make that a little bit more understandable. So I started teaching those value studies quite a
Mhm.
while ago now, probably 10 years ago. I started doing those, and it made a big difference. And it actually, because I wasn't doing them that much, once I started teaching them and doing them more, now, I mean, that made a huge difference in my work too. Because
Mhm.
I'm no different than anybody else. I was trying to find those big shapes, but I'm sure I wasn't succeeding nearly at the level that I was after I started teaching them and doing them for
Mhm.
myself.
Yeah. I think that's something very unique that you developed. I like it a lot. I learned a lot from it.
Good.
I wanted to I wanted to say about Sargent because you mentioned him earlier. It's funny to call him underrated, but I do think his watercolors are still underrated. You don't see them anywhere, and I think they're better, honestly, than some of his oils,
Oh
and
yeah.
definitely some of the best. There's something about it. Like when you look at Alvaro Castanet and Joseph's Bookfitch, I could definitely lump them together. Now, for us, for me and you, we can tell the nuances. We were so used to seeing what makes them unique. But let's take someone from the outside. They could kind of accidentally lump them together. Sargent, for me, is removed from everyone. Now,
Everybody.
I don't
Yeah.
know if that's a different time period and other artists were like him, but to me, he stands alone on his own, completely separate from anyone else.
Yeah. You have to wonder how, I mean, how much oil painting informed his decisions by all that use of gouache. But I mean, obviously his oil paintings are very fresh too. But he was doing portraits, so capturing that likeness was, so important. So
Yeah.
obviously the accuracy and everything. I mean, the guy was a master draftsman, number one. But I've always wondered that, how did he go from those oil paintings to those incredibly loose and gestural watercolors? That's just amazing to me. I think those are his tour de force are those watercolors he did late in his career. You could tell he was just having fun.
In his peak.
Having fun, showing off. Yeah. And sadly, I mean, even at that time, like you said, they must have been considered, not worthless, but there were so many of them. He just, signed on and gave them away to people. Yeah. Even then he wasn't thinking of them as serious pieces of work. I hate that that reputation that watercolor has, through
you want to hear something really funny? That's exactly my next question. Thank you for the perfect segue. What do you think about the status of watercolor these days?
That's funny. Yeah, it's still a struggle, right? I mean, especially in America. I don't know. I can't speak to all the other countries, but oil is still king here.
Even acrylics.
Yeah, exactly. Galleries don't really like having too many watercolors. It's unfortunate because I know a lot of amazing oil painters, landscape painters, and they're genuinely impressed with my watercolors, and to the point of a lot of times they say, "Wow, I don't know how you do that. I wouldn't even try to do that," And yet their paintings are fetching 10 times of what mine are, So yeah, it's tough. Unfortunately, like I said, I think everybody knows and acknowledges that watercolor is a very difficult medium, if not the most difficult medium. But yeah, it's those kinds of negative impressions about watercolor in general are so ingrained at this point in galleries and art collectors and stuff that it's too fragile. It's not going to last, and it's on paper, so it's
which is unsubstantiated completely.
Yeah, no, right? It's but like I said, they're just so ingrained now that people don't take the time to research it unless we do a better job of letting them know that. But so yeah, the current president of AWS, Antonio Massi, made a great point a while ago too. He said it's incumbent on us as watercolor artists too to not undervalue our work. We can sit here and complain about it. And charge $200 because it's a watercolor, or we can, start educating people and charging more for our work. And, so I've been trying to take that to heart a little bit too. It's, it's up to us to try and change those preconceived notions about the invaluableness of watercolor.
Yeah. And I think there is some merit to, art is detached from time for sure. But let's say there is an argument to be made that if something took much longer to paint, then yes, it makes sense that it'll be more expensive. But the gap is still it's still out of whack completely. Yeah. So I can understand a situation where a given oil will be more expensive than a given watercolor, but there is still a huge gap to close. I'll put the scoop on the table. I think watercolor is superior to every other medium just because of the sheer versatility in the result itself. You can create as gradual of a transition as you want, or as sharp of a transition as you want. You can do so much with it. It's less forgiving. It's harder to do. And even if you look at it again from a usefulness kind of for us artists, it's faster to paint. It's cheaper. It has all the advantages. And I think it's more impressive. If you look at the artists that have that insane control, there is this guy, Misulbu. I don't know if you saw their videos on YouTube. He's doing portraits, hyper realistic portraits. He gets and it's hyper realistic in a way that's very fresh and so it's not very dull and like a million different glazes. He gets to the point. He's very Misulbu, Misulbu. A lot of my audience is familiar with he's or she. I'm not sure. They're Korean. Very impressive. I'm going to write it in the chat for other people.
Check that out.
I'm sure you've seen their work before, kind of popping up somewhere. To reach that level where they get the strand of hair by lifting, by knowing the exact timing, and it's not the lifting kind that kind of moves outside and it's sharp. It's sharp lifting. It's insane. And it's very impressive. So
Huh.
to me, and again, not to bash on other mediums, every medium has their place. I just think the latter currently is so out of balance
Yeah,
that
it's
makes me
such
think like, well, okay, watercolor is much more superior than people imagine it to be, you know.
yeah,
And I
and I
think a
think
lot
in
of
general,
that,
I think the general public likes watercolor quite a
yeah.
bit. You know, I've had that comment that when I was doing more plein air things, the plein air events, there'd be it's 36 artists there, and there'd be 2 watercolorists. You know, they're all oil painters, and so people would come around and find you at these events. And I've had so many people come up and say, "Oh, good, a watercolorist," you know, because it's something different. It's got its own unique charm and look to it. I think
Mhm.
that, watercolors, they just kind of, because of the transparency of the medium, I just think they are great. Uh, it's a great medium for capturing that light and those impressions
Yeah.
outside. You know, that the transparency of shadows is a
Mhm.
big thing, because
Yeah.
that's what a shadow is. It's a transparent dark where you can see the local color
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
object underneath it. And all the other media, because they're opaque, you have to try and recreate that, not just the value but the color of those shadows. Whereas watercolor, you can put the wash down and get the local colors, wait a little bit, put a nice
Mhm.
translucent fluid shadow on, and it just looks so great. It's just a beautiful medium for capturing that outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely put myself in the position to kind of guarantee that I'll try elevating the status of watercolor. Um,
I'm trying, and I go back. I
yeah,
mean, so let me
people
ask you
like you
this.
definitely do this. Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask you a question. Thank you. Let me ask you a question. So, because I've gone back and forth on this, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Whenever I post a painting, I always post it and then I say watercolor after it. So, but I've heard, and I get this argument too. I hear people say, "Stop referring to yourself as a
Mm.
watercolorist. You're a
Mm.
painter.
Yeah.
Then stop. If you're worrying about that, separate it out." But I'm also trying to. I mean, I've had people ask sometimes,
Mhm.
"Is that an oil painting or is that a watercolor?" So I'm trying to, just make sure that that's out there right away, that this is a watercolor painting. So I go back and forth on that. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. What do you think?
Hmm. It's an interesting question because initially my response is like, yeah, I mean, you don't have to specify or you don't have to define yourself in a way that's like you're just a watercolorist.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will depend on your personality. So if you're very extroverted and you're like, you want to give that show, maybe saying I'm a watercolorist has that effect of like, look at that, that's watercolor. And maybe if you're more reserved, you can drop that and just say you're a painter. And then if someone asks you privately, you're like, yeah, that's a watercolor. I don't think there's a right answer. I think it will depend definitely on your character and what. It's
Yeah.
a great question. I haven't thought of. I thought of it more from the angle of should I mention that it's watercolor or should I just mention it's a painting? Because it's
Yeah.
like there is paintings and then there's a subsection that is watercolor, and I don't see that as a necessary thing. But to your original question, yeah, it's interesting. That's my
Yeah.
take. I think it'll depend.
Well, and again, I think a lot of it goes back to the way I paint. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of watercolors where you look at it and there's no doubt, that's a watercolor
Yeah,
painting.
yeah. You know.
But literally, I've had people ask me, or mention, boy, you do it like an oil painter, or they ask, is that a watercolor or an oil painting? So I'm always trying to make sure I'm letting them know right off the bat that it is a watercolor. So yeah, I don't know. I've gone through that in my head a few times. I don't know what the right answer is, or if there's a right answer. I'm just curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll figure it out. It seems like the younger generations they really like watercolor, and I see it on younger platforms like TikTok, Instagram too.
Nice.
Very popular, and there is a good understanding of how difficult it is. So
Yeah,
that ingrained perception may change over time.
I sure hope so. I mean, it's not like that
I'm
everywhere. I
certain.
don't think that's one of
I'm
the
actually
reasons why I
certain.
love England. England watercolor is still, looked at as a viable medium. China is. I've
Amazing.
been to China many times. They adore
They love it.
the
They love it, right?
watercolorists. They organize all these big international watercolor, festivals. Russia. There's so
Mm.
many young, talented
Yeah.
watercolor artists in Russia and the Ukraine, and Eugen Chisnagin from Moldova, and yeah, all these great, even like in the Middle East too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Iran.
Iran
There's
is huge.
yeah, really cool
Yeah, they're good.
watercolors, and they have their own kind of style too. When I see it, it's amazing. I did a whole thing this year-long course that I'm teaching on kind of the regionality of watercolor and how you can kind of look
Interesting.
at it and say,
I can
it's
tell.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an Indian watercolorist, or that's an Iranian watercolorist, or that, you can tell right off.
Yeah.
It's so strange.
That's so true. You have, I think it's pronounced Javed Tabtabai. He's amazing, and you can tell by the granulations. You can tell by the, and then you have more Indian water. You can tell by the way they leave highlights, and also the French ultramarine is very popular.
Yeah,
You can tell all of that. Russian is more of a lot of colors in one painting. I noticed that a lot.
and a lot of
Yeah,
softness. The Russian
softness.
watercolorists, they
Yeah,
work this wet
their
end.
edge work.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's, I mean, that makes sense. You're kind of you're surrounded by those people, and you're painting together, and that's how it all develops. The Australian watercolorists, they kind of have that same style a little bit too. Ross Patterson and Casey Seeley and those guys. When you look at their work, it's similar, and a lot of it goes back to subject matter, obviously too. But subject and style wise.
Sometimes the subject matter will kind of dictate the style, which is very interesting, because not just not the end result only, but if you're used to painting in watercolor cityscapes, then you have to become a master of merging a lot of shapes, even more than landscapes, I would argue, because you can't possibly tackle everything at once. Right. There is some merit to that. Now, if you're doing a lot of portraits, working maybe in sections, maybe I'm just kind of making things up, but I do feel like the subject can dictate the technique, and then you can use that technique for other subjects, which is something I really enjoy doing. How can I apply the alla prima approach I do for portraits for a landscape where I feel like I don't allow myself sometimes to work section by section because I'm scared to have things dry on me, or just work from one area and then fill in patches next to it, which can create a beautiful result and very original too.
Yeah, they can. I mean, John Yardley paints that way. If you see his videos, he's not. Very impressionistic.
He hates wet and wet.
Yeah,
I love the trailer. He's like, well, I don't like using wet and wet. I never get the control. I never get it right.
Complete opposite from how I do it. Yeah. But he manages to get. I mean, but he'll still join small shapes together. Just using his brush, and he gets a lot of beautiful lost edges. But it's definitely got a different.
His interiors.
Oh, right. I just love it.
It's so subtle. You look at it. I look at it. I'm like, I don't understand why I love it so much, but I love it so much.
They're incredible. Yeah, those are his interiors are my favorites of his. Yeah, those elegant dining rooms and stuff. They're just the so piano wonderful. And when he has the oil paintings on the wall, the way he just kind of shows, a portrait, so nice. So simply, it's amazing. Wow. Yeah.
That's my favorite. That's the thing I really like about your work. Your ability to really simplify it down to the essence of it, and not lose the sense of realism. I notice a lot of very complex techniques in your skies when you do wet and clouds against sunset. That's something that's very hard to get the timing right. They always either spread out too much or it's too late, and I get these weird cauliflowers. Even though I'm using thicker paint, it's so nuanced. It's like Chinese for someone who doesn't, Yeah.
Well, trust me, I still get that too. I still get the balloons and stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It happens. It happens. But those are, that's watercolor. If you're not willing to risk that to get those results, you're not going to improve. So it's important to go for it and just kind of know this might not turn out, but maybe the next one will.
Yeah. So let's end it on a fun note. I have a few kind of fire round questions, I think, or maybe one or two. I don't know. Maybe two. I miscalculated. So let's see. Okay. So if you could only use 3 colors for the rest of your life, which ones?
Wow. Payne's Gray, Burnt Sienna. Payne's Gray, Burnt Sienna, and Lavender, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I like those. I like it. The first two, you're like, it's gonna have to be useful stuff, and then the third one is, I just want that for fun. I'm thinking about how useful they are to me. I use Payne's Gray. I barely even go to my ultramarine blue anymore. It's too strong. It's too intense. I use cerulean blue, and obviously cobalt blue you need for skies and stuff too. But if I need a cool dark, I almost always go to Payne's Gray over ultramarine blue. And then I threw burnt sienna in there just because, I mean, my gosh, it's such as a landscape painter, you've got to have some kind of that
The warmth.
warm earth tone in it. And then, and then how much I love lavender. So I don't know how useful the lavender would be with those other two, but I couldn't take it off.
You have to paint something with these three now and post it.
Oh, damn.
No
I
pressure, though.
I knew that was coming.
That was unplanned. That was completely spontaneous. It wasn't a trap, trust me. So another question, another fun one. What's the largest number of paintings you did one day, one day, let's say?
Probably 4, maybe 5. There's times that I'm...
Workshops?
What's that?
Workshops or just for yourself?
Not workshops. No. When I'm out plein air painting at a location, I've gone out with friends like on Catalina Island. We'll go down there to paint for that show, and we'll go out. We'll start walking out with our gear as the sun's coming up, and we don't stop till the sun goes down. And it's still painting. So I can usually get. What's that? Oh, yeah. So I can get a couple paintings done in the morning, and then maybe 3, afternoon to evening to early evening, if I'm working small and fast enough. But that's exhausting. 4 paintings in a day is, let alone 5. That takes so much mental energy. And then when I'm on Catalina, we're usually hiking around, to locations too. So physically and mentally, you're just, your head hits the pillow and you're out. But that's such a good tired though. With that, even if the paintings, don't turn out, which like I said, the majority of them, it's such a satisfying.
They grab something from the location.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's probably the most I've done. I'm sure I've done 5 before, but not 5 good ones, but I've done 5.
That's great. I love that. And everyone is, if you can get a few different hours, completely different color schemes, like one that's a little red sunsetty, another one is I love that kind of a thing. And I think that tiredness is just an testament to how much mental resources it takes to be that focused. It really is so demanding.
Yeah, I have people ask me all the time, do you work on more than one painting at the same time? No, it takes all my focus. I can't jump around back. But I paint fast too. There's no reason for me to have another painting going when I'm done in 2 or 3 hours, anyways. But it takes all my focus on that one painting that I'm working on to get it to work out. I'd have a hard time making a mental shift over to another one and then going back and forth. So but I have limited brain power, so.
We all do, don't worry. It's not just
I have to keep things simple up there.
Yeah, cool. So let's do this. So I want to first thank everyone who's in here in the chat. We're coming up on an hour and a half. I think it's a good time to start bringing it to a close. I want to, again, thank anyone who's here. I really appreciate it. And you have a lot of fans in the audience, just so you know. I think it'll be interesting. It's a bit hard to get to all the questions. So feel free if you want to leave a question as a comment. We'll get to it. I'll definitely go over them. Andy, you can, but you don't have to. If you want to afterwards pick 1 or 2 and answer them, that'll be great. And
how do I get to them? How do I get to those?
Yeah, not no, it's okay, not now. This is why I wanted this to be really kind of to go by the plan, but after the fact, you can just visit the video and you'll see the normal YouTube comments. If someone has an important question, they'll just post it as a comment, and then if you feel like it, you can answer them. I'll try and do them.
Yeah, I'll try and get
part of it. But some of them are for you, so
okay.
People want your input. So I'll say. I really do appreciate you coming on. It really is an honor to talk to you. I'm serious, and it's, you never know the influence you have on other people, and your work goes beyond what you think. It gets to people beyond, and it influences them in ways that I get it too. I can't comprehend it for my own work. So just know that it's meaningful. It's great fun to look at. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
It means a lot. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. And I want to ask you one thing that you're excited about, an upcoming project, something you want to promote. Now's the time. Or anything else.
So I'm excited about, I've got several good things coming up. I'm judging some big shows. I got asked to be a juror selection for AWS, and I'm judging this big Transparent Watercolor Society show this year too. So I've got a couple of those opportunities. But the thing I'm most excited about is I've got a couple nice teaching opportunities in England, and kind of hoping that becomes more of almost, if not an annual trip, maybe a biannual trip, if I can keep making inroads over there and getting over there.
I heard you're a big fan. Yeah.
So next May and next June, I'm going to be teaching a couple workshops in England. So that'll be a blast. I'm looking forward to that.
That's great. So, and if people want to find you, I put all the links in the description box. Be sure to check out Andy's excellent watercolors. There's a lot to learn. Also classes. Do you have courses that are ongoing online? This is something they can check out.
Yep. So I have a year-long course that people can. It's going to open back up again in November through Tucson Art Academy online. I've got that course coming up. I'm teaching a short little kind of a 6-month, I think it is, a video series with Konstantin Sturkov's Artefacto School Online. Yeah. So he asked me to do. I've got the 4 videos with them that I'm going to have coming out too, and then I've got a bunch of Zoom workshops and things too that are upcoming. So if you go to my website, there's all sorts of online opportunities to learn from me, and in person.
We have this fancy banner. So check it out. And thank you so much. We're going to end the live stream now, but we're going to stay on and talk for a few more minutes. So thank you so much to anyone who was here. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, everyone.